Aloha, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Um, Welcome and thank you for joining the COVID-19 Public Health Action Webinar, Mental Wellness Tips and Strategies for Surviving and Thriving. My name is Stephanie Moyer, and I'm the Community Initiatives and Training Coordinator for the Hawaii Public Health Institute. I will be serving as moderator for today's webinar. Before we get started, we want to go over a few Zoom housekeeping items. First of all, for all questions, please utilize the chat box or question and answers box located at the bottom of your screen. We will not be offering any continuing education credits for this webinar series. And lastly, all webinars are being recorded and will be available on the Hawaii Public Health Training Hui's YouTube channel. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce you to our guest speaker today. Her name is Mestisa Gass. Dr. Mestisa Gass is the Program Director for Mental Health America of Hawaii. She graduated with a master's and doctorate degree in clinical psychology from Argosy University. Her education and experience has been focused on diverse populations, including inpatient acute adolescent care, community mental health, and military mental health. Her training and work has emphasized diversity and trauma-focused care. She is a certified trainer for Mental Health America's Youth Suicide and Bullying Prevention Training for Trainers curriculum. She worked as a clinician and therapist for the past 15 years in the South and now in Hawaii. She has been in Hawaii since 2006, being originally from the Appalachian Mountains. She is passionate about bringing education, support, and resources to all communities, especially rural areas like those in which she was raised. So now I'd like to turn it over to Mestisa.
Aloha, everyone, and thank you for joining me. I'm hoping that my internet stays stable. There's a lot of heavy use. So if we could go ahead and move into the slideshow, perfect. So today we're going to be talking about thriving and surviving during this difficult time. Some of the core concepts that we're going to be talking about are self-care tips, mental health strategies, what to do when you have pre-existing mental health challenges, and then resources we can find for community members. You'll see to the left hand of the screen that we have some graphics up. Those are all from our Live in the Now Instagram account that is based in self-care. So if you want to see those, you can go straight to our Instagram account to look at them that you're going to find in the slide. So if you want to go ahead and move forward. So one of the things I wanted to talk about before we got into talking about really specific self-care tips are some of the self-care myths that I've been seeing as I've been looking on social media. So the first one I wanted to talk about is this idea of needing to be productive. Recently, I saw a meme that said, if we come out of quarantine and you haven't learned Italian, then you weren't ever going to learn it. And I think that puts down a very challenging, a very inconsistent answers. So what I want to talk about is the idea of being productive during quarantine. I think for some people that is a coping skill. It's part of their self-care. I myself often do hobbies. It just relaxes me. But for other people, that's not their mode of coping. It's not one of their big self-care pieces. And so to say that we should all be organizing our pantries or learning how to make Afghans is really unrealistic. Just to see that productivity that is in our day-to-day culture has now also become part of an expectation of what we're going to come out of quarantine with is a really unhealthy expectation. So that's the first one I wanted to talk about is this need to be productive. Some days you're going to have a difficult time following just a regular schedule, and some days you're going to have maybe some issues with grief, and we're going to talk about why that is. So be gentle with yourself, be caring with yourself and others, and just understand that should not be what we start off with, is this idea of being very, very productive, because it's not vacation time. So the second one I wanted to talk about that I've been seeing is this idea that you shouldn't be having certain feelings. These feelings could be grief, it can be sadness, anger, confusion. We're going to talk about this when we talk about self-care, but the first thing we have to really do is start to validate how we feel. So there are going to be some days that we feel confused or numb. There'll be some days when we feel anxious and some days when we feel okay, we feel good, and we feel happy. And that's all normal. You're having normal responses to a very abnormal situation. For many of us, we haven't been through this before. We haven't been through these kind of crises. I think the older generations have been through somewhat similar ones. But for us and for the younger generations, this could be very, very new. So just kind of honor the fact that whatever your emotional response, those are appropriate responses. How you process them and how you move through them are the things that we're going to look at today. Another one I have heard is I don't need self care. That's not something I need to be focusing on. I'm focusing on a lot of other things. Well, there's the old saying that you can't pour from an empty cup. Right now, we need a lot of people to support one another. We need to come together as a community and look at the things that are happening. We need to be there for our family members, for our loved ones. And that means our cup has to be as full as we can get it. And we're going to talk about why that can be challenging in just a few minutes. So the next myth that I have looked at and seen is I will only feel this way once. And it's the idea that your emotions are linear, that you're going to have feelings of maybe confusion in the beginning, then anger, then kind of accepting into feeling happy every day, and that you should stay in that happy zone. But the reality is, we're getting inundated with information. It's coming from the entire world, from different countries, from our own country, and from things in the state. So we're going to have different emotional responses to that, and that's okay. You might feel confused at the beginning and at the end, and even have emotional responses once we're back and transitioning into working again. But those are all normal responses. We're going to honor everyone's process and be really supportive. So self care is super important, and feeling how you need to feel, that's part of that. So one of the things I've heard is that we shouldn't be telling our keiki what's happening. And I will say there's kind of an agreement and kind of a disagreement from my end of things. If we're going to talk to our keiki, which we should because they're very smart, they know something is going on, even for our littlest ones. I think that you should be age appropriate. You should be developmentally appropriate. So if you're talking to a young child, talking about things like contagion and other really lofty concepts that at their age range that they can't understand isn't where we want to be. So making sure that you discuss it. So some of the things I've seen people talk about in terms of discussing it with their keiki is either likening it to a storm. And so we stay inside when there's a storm and we wait till it's over and then we can go back outside because it's safe, or even talking about it in terms of a cold. So what do we do when we have a cold? We stay inside, we rest, we do what we need to do to take care of ourselves. And we will talk about it in a few minutes, what we can do specifically to help the keiki do their own types of self-care, because adult self-care can be transitioned into a version for keiki, but we can't just teach them specifically like we're learning it because it won't make a lot of sense to them. So yes, we should absolutely be talking to them about what's happening, but making sure we're doing it in a way that maintains their feelings of safety and protection, and more than anything, for hope. So if we can move forward a slide, perfect. So I wanted to talk about this so that we can kind of get through the difficult information in the beginning, because this is a big piece that I haven't seen a lot of people talk about, and it's the idea of grief. So when I talk about grief, I'm talking about an experience that we're having worldwide, and I think it's really important to understand that some people are experiencing this as universal trauma. And when we have trauma, we absolutely have grief. So some people think of grief as when you lose someone, but the reality of it is grief at its core is loss. So it can be a loss of something or a loss of someone. And for people in our community, they're having sometimes both or one or the other. For example, a loss of lifestyle. For many of us that are privileged enough, we are working from home, and that's a change. And for some people, they are at home but not working, and that's really difficult transition, and that's a grief period. So no matter what it is that we're doing, whatever position that we're in, whether it's staying home, whether it's going to work, we should all honor the fact that there is a change that has happened, and we could be experiencing grief, not just for ourselves, but for our community, for our state, for the world, because we're seeing what's happening. Pre-existing history of trauma, if you've had grief in the past, this can be really difficult for you. I'm not saying it's not difficult for all of us, but if you have a history where you have survived trauma, even if you have worked through it, things that trigger up similar feelings can also have you trigger up symptoms that are very intense. So just understand that if you're having that, if you are having an increase in feelings such as depression, anxiety, feeling triggered from trauma, that you can reach out. We absolutely have people who are available. You can, if you haven't seen someone before, you can contact your insurance. There's a list of people who are providing telehealth. You can reach out if you do have a provider, because a lot of the providers that I know went ahead and started to switch to telehealth so that would be available. So don't assume that your provider is not seeing people. Just reach out and see if telehealth is going to be an option. We want to make sure that people feel supported through this process because it's new and it's different, and we all want to come out of this having hope and understanding that it can get better. Existing self care and coping skills. Why is this part of the grief section? Well, because when we heard about what was happening, we didn't stop and learn. Not all of us, maybe some of us might have, but we didn't all stop and learn yoga, deep breathing, meditation. We didn't take journaling classes to figure out how to process what we were feeling. We just bought our groceries, we went home, and we did what we were told to do to be safe. So we went into quarantine with exactly what we had, and we didn't have time to plan ahead to learn new coping skills, to learn new self care items. So, part of what we're looking at is when you're having feelings of grief, just do a self inventory. Ask yourself, do I have what I need? If you feel like you don't have what you need, there's so many resources online. You can, again, reach out to find a provider who can be supportive or look for support groups. We want to make sure that everyone has what they need. And part of that is understanding that we're all going to cope with this differently. For some people, they're going to watch funny movies, they're going to try to be distracted by doing different things. And for others, they're going to sit in that emotion, and that's okay. As long as it doesn't feel overpowering, as long as it doesn't interrupt what you want to do in your day to day, as long as it doesn't end in you feeling unsafe, we're all going to cope differently, and that's okay. We're going to honor that process. We're all going to grieve this very differently. Some people are going to be more communicative about it. They're going to talk about it. They're going to want to get support around it, and others are going to be a little bit more quiet about it and try to figure it out themselves. Again, whatever you choose to do, just make sure that you have the support systems that you need and the tools available to you. We're going to honor everyone's process is different, and that those are all okay as long as they're healthy. If you want to move forward a slide. Thank you. So when I was thinking about grief, because I used to work with a group of people who were diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, and grief was a large part of their experience. One of the models that I had heard about and that I had looked at in depth was the Kubler-Ross model. So when I started thinking about that we're all experiencing this universal grief, I thought, what would be a good way to kind of conceptualize it for all of us? And I thought of Kubler-Ross. Now I'm going to be very clear in letting you know this isn't a very evidence heavy backed model. It is an interesting model, I think, for conceptualization of what people can be going through. So these are the 5 different stages. You're going to look at denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So I took that model and overlaid it on some of the things that I'm seeing, and I would absolutely love to hear how you are seeing some of these things also in social media and in your community and in your family. But let's look at it as something that we've been seeing in some of the examples that I have. So for denial, some of the things that we've seen is the idea that it's okay because it's not here in my community or it's not happening specifically to me. And that can actually play a role in just feeling shocked. We saw that, I think many people kind of instantly think of the spring breakers who were saying like YOLO. And the reality of it is like it was happening then. So why take that stance? And part of what it is when you go through grief is there's an element of denial that things are changing, that it could happen to you, that this is a reality. And so that was some of what we were seeing, and it was very difficult for those of us who weren't in that stage to really kind of grasp our mind around it and think like, how did you end up there? But in grief in general, we do see some of that happening. The other piece is the next stage is anger, which can also look like anxiety. When we feel anxious, sometimes we avoid the things that we need to do. That's especially true if we have a history of trauma or a diagnosis that is trauma related, anxiety related. But we can also over control. So trying to control your environment because the inside of you feels very out of control, or the situation that you're in that we're all in feels very out of control. It's important to look at that because the thing that we want to be careful of is a feeling of helplessness. Helplessness means there's nothing I can do to make it better. And I would like to reframe the following of safety guidelines to making sure that we're quarantining and being safe at home if that's what you've been asked to do as something that is within our control, as something that we can do. Sometimes we feel like we want to be advocates, we want to go out there and help people who are essential workers who are on the front line. But our job, if you've been asked to stay at home, is to absolutely quarantine and be as safe as we possibly can. That's how we become people who can support the effort. Bargaining looks a little different, I think, for this specifically. So I've seen people like looking and sharing stories both that are challenging and at the extreme on either end. So what I mean by that is to say I've seen people share stories of like, look how challenging this can be. Look at this specific story and how difficult they're having a time. And while that is very true, that's a singular story. And so we need to be really careful about what we're sharing and why we're sharing it, because people are going to see that and start to wonder, is that going to be my story? But we all have our own story, just like we can find really positive stories and really positive outcomes. We just have to be careful when we're doing this phase of looking for and sharing individualistic stories as to why we're sharing them. And we're going to talk about that more when we talk about like responsibility in social media use. So the next stage is depression. Depression absolutely can be an increase in feeling sad or feeling these feelings of grief. Um, that's a normal response for what we're going through. We're going through an abnormal situation. So if you're feeling sad, if you're wanting to sleep a little bit more that day, if you're needing to reach out to your support system, then do that. Make sure you have what you need. These are all normal feelings of people who have diagnoses, who had a pre-existing issue with depression, are going to need to make sure that they're absolutely staying tied into their support system with their providers, making sure that they have what they need. If you know someone in your family or community who struggles with these things, please reach out to them, make sure they're okay. I've been asked, well, how do I know if people are having these normal responses of feeling sad and feeling, grief is a normal response? How do I know if someone I care about is unsafe? Well, again, we're going to look at really specific indicators. Is their depression increasing? Are they not staying connected? Because physical distancing is not the same as, socially distancing. We can still call and make videos and text. So if you're hearing less and less from them, then that's also an indicator, hey, I should reach out to them. And it's okay to ask the question, are you having thoughts of suicide if that's what you're really worried about? The research shows that will not increase the likelihood for the person to act on that, but it does make them know, hey, this is a person that I can talk to and there are resources available. And I will be providing you with a crisis line number for the state, specifically for Oahu and for our neighbor islands, so that you will have that in case you need it. But we want to make sure that we're supporting everyone in our circle, especially ourselves, and doing our self-care so that we can work through those kinds of emotions. The next step is acceptance. So I put radical acceptance in here because I think it's one of my favorite things that I ever learned. It comes out of dialectical behavioral therapy. And if you know the Serenity Prayer, it will sound very, very familiar because it's the same thing. It's just an example of radical acceptance. So what that is it's if you can change something, change it. And if you can't, accept that you can't. It's really kind of that simple. And while it's simple, it's very, very hard to do. It's a daily choice to radically accept what you cannot change. So if we look at that for what's happening, one of the things I can't change is that it's happening. It's absolutely happening. One of the things I have control of that I can make changes around is how I choose to react to that. Is whether I'm going to be compliant to staying inside and being safe, whether I'm going to reach out to people, whether or not I'm going to control how much I'm consuming from the news and from the media, and how I'm going to regulate my emotions. So those are all really important things for me to control and to feel empowered in controlling, so that again, I don't start having feelings of helplessness or hopelessness, like nothing's going to change, because we do know that things will change. One of the books that I love to read is Thich Nhat Hanh's Nomad No Lotus. He was a Vietnamese Buddhist monk who was active, spiritual leader during the Vietnamese War. And people came to him and they said, when will this war end? And so, as a spiritual leader, he really felt like he needed to have an answer. And so, he went into meditation. And what he came back with was a very profound answer, though very simple on the surface. So, what he came back with is he said, I don't know when it will change, but I know that it will change because everything changes. And so, that's part of radical acceptance, is to know that this too will change. This too will get better because that's just life. It's like the seasons. And that's also a great way to explain it to our little ones, is to say, I don't know when it's going to end, but I know that it will end because everything does, because it keeps changing and moving forward. The other thing is the understanding of we're settling into a new. And so what we want to do is to make sure that we're just radically accepting that this is going to be different, this is going to be new to us, and that that's okay. We might have had plans, we might have had ideas of what certain months or certain time frames or events would look like, and that's not what's going to happen, but that's okay because it's a new experience for us. It's a new future for us. And we just need to stay focused on that we're going to need some adapting as we move forward. Yep, we can move slides. So let's talk about specific self-care tips. We talked about grief because it's a really important emotion for us to talk about, and it hasn't really been happening. Because the first thing that we should do is validate our emotions. However we're feeling, they're how we feel. We need to honor that instead of saying, look, I shouldn't feel this way, or I don't know why you're feeling like that. We should just say, like, I understand. I could see why you would feel that way. I understand why I would feel that way. This is a really challenging time. When we validate it, it feels much better than having someone say to us, or having ourselves say to us, like, we shouldn't feel that way. Like, that's not, a normal response. Validate the emotion. Make sure you get the support around it if you feel like you need it. Connect with your social support system, which is rolling us into our next one, which is stay connected. You can get, so this is where we come up with Facebook Live, Marco Polo, sending texts, signing up for social apps that maybe you didn't before. I have friends who are now TikToking, and it's really, quite cute and fun to watch them with their videos. There's so many ways we can stay socially connected while remaining physically distanced. Our next self-care tip is don't overcheck. I can honestly say I was very guilty of this in the beginning. I was checking to see what the new updates were, what the new numbers were, what the statistics were. That was just my way of trying to control those feelings of anxiety. But I noticed the more that I checked, wasn't the more information that I was getting. Actually, I was getting very conflicting news reports and getting even more confused. So I decided, actually, in reality, the most important information that I can get once a day. If you're feeling like that's not enough, that's okay. Schedule yourself to check twice a day. But just know that when you're kind of looking for that information, the more you check is not going to make you feel less anxious. Maybe in the beginning it will, but in the long run, it just becomes something that also feels overwhelming. So please keep updated, but be mindful of how much you're checking. The next one is one of my favorite ones, which is focus on the helpers. So there's that saying that says when there's a crisis or when there's an emergency, you're just going to look for the helpers because you'll always find them. And I think that's really true. I love seeing the news articles about people who are making masks at home who can sew, people who are doing hotels for heroes because they have that space available. As you're consuming information and getting the numbers and looking at, all those pieces, make sure that you're also finding uplifting articles that show you that things are getting better. One of the big pieces I think is looking for the recovered number of how many people got to go home, how many people are doing better. We just have to create that balance for ourselves. Checking on the essential workers and the vulnerable in your circle. This has been a big piece that we've talked about in keeping our kapuna safe. So if you have kapuna in your neighborhood, in your community, in your family circles, reach out to them, make sure they're okay. There are a lot of different organizations who are providing care to them. If you're needing to get something delivered to them, that's also available. You can go to our website, which we'll talk about in a little while, or call us. We can help connect you to those. But we want to make sure that we're calling people who either have pre-existing conditions, who are, taking care of someone at home, who are vulnerable, whether because they of their age, age or kind of medical conditions or mental health conditions. We just need to make sure we're providing as much support as we can. But again, you can't pour from an empty cup, which is why it's so, so important to take care of yourself. Follow a schedule. I know you're all probably saying like, oh, but Dr. G, this is where I get to sleep in. Yes, so I agree that we can all get more rest probably than they were getting before. But if we just, for those of us who aren't following a work schedule and staying home, for those of us who are sleeping in late, who are going to bed late, it's going to actually be more difficult to transition back to work into a working position if we don't create some kind of schedule. And it's not just about the transition, it's really about how to make a break. One of the big jokes I think I've heard a lot is this idea of like, what day is it? Is it Monday, Tuesday, blah day? Like, no one really, the weekends kind of blur together. And that's actually really hard. It's hard for kids to feel a consistency in their schedule. It's hard for people to feel like they can step away and have like a division between work and staying home. And for those who unfortunately aren't working right now, it's really hard in their day to create some kind of balance. So just making sure you can create whatever schedule that you need to, but that in that schedule, you make sure you put self-care. So we can move to the next slide. So that's why that's on the top of my list. Absolutely schedule in self-care. I have to say that I'm a little guilty of this. I wake up and I have these like lofty ideas of how I'm going to meditate and practice deep breathing and learn something new. And then all of a sudden it's 5 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and I've only done one of those things. And that's okay. That's really okay. But I did find when I started scheduling in breaks to do certain things, to go out into the garden, to spend time with my pets, to call a loved one, that it happened more regularly because I had put it into a schedule. So it can be very, very helpful and make it easier to kind of get through the week and know what day it is and know what time it is when we follow the schedule and also schedule in the self-care. So use social media responsibly. We're actually going to talk about using social media responsibly more in depth. And so we're going to go over that in just a few minutes. Make sure that you identify online resources. I've been really, really happy to see how many free online resources are becoming available. There's so many nonprofits and state organizations that are posting lots of free things. Recently, I saw that one of the news channels was doing a meteorology show for kids, and I thought, oh, I love that. That's so great, because we need as many resources as we can, because it's very hard to keep them engaged and even sometimes to keep ourselves engaged and moving forward instead of, again, over checking. So just know there's a lot of online resources. If there are issues and you're struggling financially, there are some resources to absolutely reach out for that. Business owners, absolutely some resources. So please look for those and know that we also have those listed on our website, or we can connect you to where you can find them. Be sure to invest in yourself and to know that right now is an important time to be gentle, to be empathic, and to be compassionate to yourself. I think it can sometimes be easy to do it with other people and less easy to do it with ourselves. I think that's a general rule of thumb. But just know that right now we're all going through this and it's very difficult. And the more that we can take care of ourselves, the better that we'll be. We're using coping skills, and if you are one of those people who came in and wasn't really practicing those on the day-to-day, just know that there's some really easy ones to start with. One of the ones I think that's very powerful is journaling. An easy one that you can do any time of the day is just deep breathing from the diaphragm. You can Google that, put that to YouTube, have videos that walk you through it. Meditation, there's a lot of different kinds of coping skills, so you could literally Google coping skills and they're going to give you long lists of things to try. So I say, like, every day, if you pick something new or one that you're really comfortable with and try it, then you're going to be in a really good place. So if we'll move forward a slide. So this is talking about using social media responsibly. I'm going to be like, I'm going to self-disclose. I've been using a lot more social media than I have before in the past. I'm learning that I have a very steep curve of learning more about social media. But what I've also noticed is because we're consuming more on these social media apps, that there's a lot more information that's a lot more confusing. So we need to make sure that when we share, that we're sharing reputable sites. And what I mean by that is that you see who's putting out this information. It's a place that you know, that you've heard of, that seems to have like experts talking about things, because the more information that we share that it's inaccurate, the more likely we're going to contribute to those feelings of anxiety and fear, or even spreading like harmful information. So we just need to be really careful about what we share. This is one of those things I learned actually when I was in psychology in school that I thought was just quite brilliant to use now, which is social media sandwiches. So what do I mean by that? If you're wanting to have a difficult conversation with someone, you typically put something positive in the beginning, say the difficult thing, and then say something positive again at the end. So that's really helpful because as a species, we will pull out that negative piece. So some people say, why can't I do 50-50? Well, because we're going to hear the negative piece and override the positive piece. It's just what we tend to do. So when we do social media sandwiches, make sure you're posting an uplifting or funny meme or article, then posting something that might be a little bit more difficult. Maybe it's very, statistics heavy, or there's a story you thought was really important to share, but some people could be affected by that. And then post after that another funny or uplifting story. They don't have to be back to back, but if we all make social media sandwiches, then people who are spending that time on social media will see that balance more and feel that positivity more than if we just keep posting pieces that might be a little bit more emotive in terms of like negative emotions. So just be careful about what you're posting, and then ask yourself before you make a post, does this help inform people or does it help support someone? So I think it's crucial to ask those questions right now, because if it's not doing either one, then it may not be helpful. So if you see a resource that's being shared online, but it's not applicable to you, I would say please still share it if it's also a reputable site. I've been seeing some resources that I thought other people could absolutely find useful, but it wasn't something that I would be using. So I still shared it. I had people say, yes, thank you so much for sharing it. I think it's helpful for people because you're not always going to see those resources yourself, just to keep sharing what's happening and sharing the resources that can help support people during this time. And then this is one that I found there probably because I need to do this as well, but just limit your time on social media. It's very easy to kind of spend your day scrolling and not do a lot of other things. But I think if we can create, again, that balance, that's important. I think creating a balance in how much time you're spending on social media will help you also be able to see the days and have like these distinct experiences overall. Because what we really want to understand is for the families, for the people who are in the community that are in your social support systems, this can also be quality time. It's not always going to be, but if we definitely look at this as an opportunity as well, with our time spent at home, we can absolutely create quality time and memories with our loved ones. So we can move forward a slide. So let's talk about Keiki self-care. Of course, the first one is developmentally appropriate explanations. And I think it's one of the reasons, instead of, emphasizing age appropriate explanations, is because they're different, right? I remember my nieces and nephews were very different at the age of 5. So I don't want to say that every 5-year-old is going to hear this information that you found online and be okay to process it, or like in a place to process it. So just make sure that you also consider kind of where your child is and what would feel appropriate to share with them, that they would be still be able to feel safe and protected in hearing. But we do want to tell them a little bit of what's happening in terms of why we're staying home and why we're not returning to school, instead of making those things mysteries, because that can make them feel anxious as well. The unknown is scary for children. So the more information that we can give them in a context that they can understand is helpful. So that brings us to the next one, which is also empowering them to help. So we can feel empowered by following the safety guidelines, by doing some of these self-care activities, but it can be a little bit harder for the kids to figure out, how can I be helpful? I've seen some amazing suggestions. I think helping them create their schedule, helping them become active in some of the self-care things you may be doing. Kids are great at making things, so they can help you create homemade bath salts. They love those. There's some really easy recipes online to be able to do that. We're going to talk about some resources where you can go to help find activities for your kiki to do, but also, just letting them know that they can do things like make get well cards for the different islands and put them in a special mailbox that they can decorate and create themselves, just to wish everyone well, that they can paint or draw rainbows and put them in their windows so that other people can see that there's hope after the storm and that what we're doing is staying safe inside from the storm. So there's some really awesome ideas out there in how to help the keiki feel more empowered and to let them feel like they're helping as well. So, if you're going to make a schedule, which I highly recommend for your little ones, let them also be a part of it because they'll have more buy in. They're not going to push back on you. So, like laundry folding for 2 hours is probably not your best idea. Um, it'd probably be awesome, but let's be honest, they're not going to do that. So, let them be involved in making their schedule, be really realistic about what they're able to do, but also take into account that they're also going to have these emotional responses. Their support system has drastically changed, their capacity to get social interaction, which they used to get so much of at school and with their teachers and their friends, that has absolutely been impacted. So they might express it a little bit differently. They might be more frustrated and irritable, and there might be a little bit more acting out. Helping them recognize how they're feeling by just asking them, like, how are you feeling? Why do you think you're feeling that way? They might not understand, but for us to know that that could be some of the ways that they're choosing to express it because they're not really able to have these long sessions to talk out why they're feeling that way, but also to give them some emotional tools. So, when I was talking before about self-care, diaphragmatic breathing is great. It gives us more oxygen and it relaxes the nervous system. We cannot sit down a child and say, let's do diaphragmatic breathing so that we can control your nervous system. They're going to they're going to immediately balk at that and not want to be involved. However, you can say, let's take really deep breaths and blow out these giant bubbles. There's great recipes if you happen not to have bubbles at home for making it out of dish soap, and you can make the little bubble wands out of like I think they're called like pipe cleaners. You can use like any kind of like bendable materials, but having them go outside or be on the lanai and make big giant bubbles by taking those really deep breaths is actually diaphragmatic breathing. It's just an early form of that. So there's a lot of things you can help your child have in their emotional toolbox, from creating calming jars to giving them things that are sense wise, like soft or rough, depending upon what kind of fabrics they like, putting their favorite stuffed animals into a basket, their favorite books and movies. And so when they're feeling overwhelmed, you just have them go take something out of their emotional toolbox. So pre-creating these toolboxes with your keiki, telling them, if you're feeling frustrated, let's take something out of the toolbox. All that can be really helpful. And there's so many great examples of what you can put in their toolboxes, again, all online. And that's why we're talking about, really utilize those online resources, see what they have. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the ones that we specifically have. So we can go to the next slide. So this is one that we started recently, which is our Busy Bees Keiki Activities Facebook group. So if you go to our Facebook page, which is Mental Health America of Hawaii, go to the left hand of the screen and scroll down, you'll see groups, and then you're going to be able to join our Busy Bees activities. So we moderate it to make sure our children are safe, and we ask that adults always supervise interactions and activities, but they're going to be able to do a lot of different things, from gardening activities, meeting cool friends. That's one of the cool friends they recently met, making calming jars. So we're trying to do things that they're going to have available at home. I know there's amazing craft ideas, but I'm like, I don't have any of those things readily available. So we're trying to make sure that these are all activities that are safe and that they can find to do in their own homes. So we can move to the next one. For those of you who love to read, we also have, as in the group section on our Facebook page, the book club. So we have monthly book recommendations for both adults and for our children. And we have uh, coming this month a read along hour so that your child, if they don't have that book and they're interested in it, can still hear it, can still see it. We've been asking people in the community to contribute their favorite books, and so we would love to hear about what yours are. But we have these things available, but we also post where you can get free books. That there are a lot of really great companies that are releasing free online books that people can access if they don't have them at home. So the next slide, please. We also, just for fun, because I like movies, are also doing on our regular Facebook, Mental Health America of Hawaii page, just movies from the decade. And we would absolutely love to hear what your favorite ones are. Right now we have movie recommendations from the 80s and from the 90s, and we'll be doing them by decade and then looping back because there's so many great ones. But to also, this is just part of understanding that building in some of that area for breathing, for having a time where it's not so heavy and we're thinking about everything, that you can just watch your favorite movie that's lighthearted, that's a feel-good family-oriented movie, that will help you also create that space of deep breathing and just relaxation or just lifting the mood for the day. So we can go to our next slide. So there are a lot of different resources. We talked about that going online. If you're looking for some, there are some that are very specific. So the Department of Health has their own COVID website. You have the CDC, which is talking about qualifications for being tested. There's resources for Hawaii unemployment benefits and places that you can pick up meals for your child. That's the crisis line we were talking about earlier. They're open 24/7 and they can help you decide if you need support because you're feeling unsafe, or someone that you care about that's in your home is feeling unsafe. Absolutely, you can call this number. For Oahu, you're going to call the 832-3100. And then for the neighbor islands, you'll call the 800-753-6879. So if you're thinking, oh, I can't write these down because this is going to go pretty quick, just know that you can go to Mental Health America of Hawaii and these will be listed. If there are ones that you've seen that you are interested in finding, we can also refer you to other places. So our next slide, just to let you know that our MHA Maui office is still open and running. So if you're from Maui County and you're wanting to find updates or get information and resources and referrals there, you'll call our 808-242-6461. And then our next slide, this is going to be for Oahu and the other areas. So that is our website. Don't put www in front of it because it won't move you to where you need to be. You'll just put mentalhealthhawaii.org. And then you can call us. So we help connect people to different resources. We have a finding help directory that lists low fee to no fee services, and we can help connect you to what you need. So those are all great places to go for additional information. I would like to open it up now because I'm sure there might be some questions that I haven't seen that have come in that we might need to talk about.
Thank you so much, Mestisa.
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
our first question we have is, what are your suggestions for making the most of phone therapy sessions with clients who do not have the technology for video conferencing?
Oh, yeah, that can be really challenging, I think, because so much of when you're a provider, so much of what you look at is really body language. And so that makes it a little bit more challenging for you if you're doing teleservices. But I think building in more concrete check-ins because you can't see what's happening. Of course, we can also always like infer from the tone of voice, but that's not always 100% accurate or helpful. So just having some really concrete check-ins that you might use from just starting your sessions with, on a Likert scale of 0 to 10, where are you with your mood? Where are you with anxiety? Where are you with how you think you're doing coping wise? Like you can really just build in some concrete scales for mood, for function, for use of coping skills, for even family relations and how things are going inside the family system. Because one of the things I think we don't talk about often is what happens when you have a mixed household. So you have some essential workers and some non-essential workers, because that brings its own issues into how people are coping. So that would be my recommendation as a provider, is create some concrete check-ins that you use regularly with them, and then even possibly using journaling as a way to get more information and help them to process if you feel like that's a safe mode that you can use, because then they can spend some time away kind of working on it and have a lot of like depth and breadth to what they bring back to the sessions.
Great. Next question is, what are some strategies for virtual therapeutic outreach during this time of telehealth?
If I'm understanding the question correctly, if you're looking for telehealth options, look at your insurance companies and just call the number on the back and ask them. You can also Google it. We have on our website, you'll be able to click on the different types of insurances. I think there's a couple of them listed, not all of them, but a couple of them are. It immediately takes you to their telehealth options. So a lot of the insurances have done an amazing job in updating their websites, making sure that information is available. But if you don't see that information right off the bat for your insurance company, just take out your card, call them back, and you can ask them directly.
Next question is, what mental health platforms would you recommend for clinicians for
Oh,
individual or group sessions?
oh, that's a good question. Because, of course, our number one concern is privacy and confidentiality. So I think that depending upon each client that you're working with, you would need to just contact, because, all providers have a list of insurance companies that they work with. And from what I've been hearing and seeing, they're actually asking the providers to use their specific platforms when they're seeing their clients. So, for example, if you have Insurance A wants you to use the platform that they have available for their telehealth services. So that's where I would start to look, is to see what the different insurances that you take, what their preferred or required platforms are, because you will see there's quite a few of them that have really specific ones. And we have seen recently that, there have been some safety risks with people going online and using specific types of online kind of meetings. They're just not as secure as we would hope for them to be. So that would be my first recommendation. Absolutely, go and see what your insurance companies are asking you to use.
Next question, with everything going on with COVID, people are starting to settle into the new normals day to day. Once the threat of COVID lessens, how do we help those with readjusting to what was previously considered normalcy?
I think, and this is just my opinion, but I think that we will be changed. I think that the old normal is not going to come back exactly the way that it did. I think that, we will come out of this with this new experience, because every generation that has gone through something, whether it was a significant period of war, the Great Depression, whatever it may have been that was historically, you know, impactful at that time, that they have all come out of it and been changed by it. What I've seen happening and what I've seen people doing in terms of coping, connecting with family and their communities, spreading aloha, giving back, it's just been so heartwarming and amazing to see. So for me, I think we're transitioning into a more loving, kind of connected, new. And so I'm very excited about to see what that's going to be. But I think, it will be hard to assume that we're going to transition back to exactly what it was. I don't think that that's going to happen. But when we talk about following the schedules, staying connected, using your support systems, and understanding that change is happening as we're sitting here talking about it, those things actually help you transition back once this is done. Just this understanding of, we just need to be adaptable and to do like we've done this whole time, which is be open to what needs to happen for ourselves.
Next question is, can you provide an example of daily activities we can integrate to practice some of these coping examples and self-care tips, particularly for working parents?
Ah, yes. So, I recognize that I am very privileged that I get to be home and working, because there are people who are home who are not working. And so that's a different group and that's a different challenge. So for those of us who are home who are working, it can be very difficult, because there's no delineation of, like, I'm here working and you guys are all over there. I had a meeting the other day when my cat was prominently in the front of it and would not move. So I think when we're talking about for working parents, there's some really cool ideas. So my friend was saying, this was one of our recommendations in Busy Bees, to make Lunchables grab and goes so that they're available like they would be if your children were at school. And then that can be time that you're still engaged in working and doing what you need to do, to schedule the breaks that you can from working, and just go outside. Like, if you have a backyard, a lanai, just spend some time in nature every day, because otherwise, it can be difficult going to sleep when you haven't had any natural lighting, and that's very challenging. Uh, Simple things like deep breathing, taking warm baths, all those things that just seem like, oh, those are so small. How can those, really invest in ourselves and make us feel better? But the reality is, even those small things that you do, like putting plants on your work desk at home, or creating a workspace at home, no matter how small it is, because of, our shared space, is all crucial to helping us adapt and move forward. So figure out what works for you. See how you can implement that in your day to day, whether it's putting aromatherapy by your computer that you're using, whether it's, pre-prepping and having your kids help you with making those grab and go meals, whatever it is that kind of makes it easier for you through the day, is what we need to do.
Next question is, if working from home, do you have any suggestions on how to handle managers being focused on our productivity at work? We have been told not to think we're, quote, on vacation and feel untrusted despite being employees with good performance reviews.
That's a great question, actually. I think that there are some people who are in management who worry that there's this idea of we're all going on vacation. And I'm not saying that there aren't maybe some people who, however small that group is, who are home and kind of doing that. But we still do want to be productive. We still want to be doing, what we can to help our businesses move forward. But also, if you're really having a hard time, if it's an emotional issue, if you're having a hard time kind of orienting to working at home, to getting this really difficult information every day, that's when you can kind of step back and do an inventory and say, like, why is it so hard for me working at home? I mean, you're still allowed to set realistic boundaries around what you can do at home. I have heard that some people have struggled with having somehow a heavier workload being at home because that's what's asked of them to seem more productive. You're still allowed to be able to say, like, this is what I'm doing. If you feel like you need to, like, show a schedule that shows that you're active, that you're working, and you're doing everything asked of you, you can. That's, your option to do. But that has been something that I have heard of, and I think just being aware of, we do have to be productive, but we also have to do self-care and to, let them know, like, we're willing to support our workforce, our businesses, and have them move forward. But we also have to be realistic in how much we can do right now.
Next question is, my employer wants me to start seeing clients face to face again. What recommendations do you have for returning to in-person counseling sessions?
So that's a really great question. So we always want to look at the safety guidelines and to make sure that the request fits those guidelines. As if you're considered an essential worker and you have to return to doing face-to-face, that you're still adhering to as many of those safety guidelines as you can, whether that is creating that physical distance between you and your client, whether that's making sure you have the hand sanitizer, that you're contacting them before they come in and making sure, like, have you had a temperature? Do you have any, symptoms of having a cold or feeling sick? Because we still want to screen to make sure that people who aren't unwell aren't coming in, because that would be an issue. Making sure that they're supplying you with basic, disinfectant and cleaning supplies, so that whatever spaces people are using, that you can make sure that you can clean them off while also, being protected yourself when you're using that. We just have to follow as many safety guidelines as we can when we start to engage with people and to see people face to face again.
Next question is, any advice for parents working from home full time and helping their multiple children with distance learning? It's another full time job assisting with the distance learning, not to mention cooking, cleaning, refereeing the sibling fights, etc.
Oh yes, yes, it is I've seen so many memes about the now being an educator and working from home and being a parent. That's a really big challenge. So there's a lot of really great online resources. I think that, I was recently on a webinar from Think Tech, and they had some people who there was a homeschooling mother. She had homeschooled multiple of her children, and she had set up and she had a lot of different resources available. So that's actually one really great place to look, is to kind of Google homeschooling resources, because there's this whole group of people who've been doing it the entire time. They're very, very organized, and they could have some resources that you might find really helpful. I think the schedule is really important. So, to make sure that you have them, like, they have the expectation of, from 8 to 9, we're doing this, from 9 to 10, we're doing this. Then they go have their lunch and they get that break from everything. I think that, when you have little keiki, like, that's much harder to do because they need more, constant redirection. But if your kids are a little bit older, they can help manage their own schedules, and then you can schedule breaks to check in with them and make sure that's happening. You can schedule, like, homework that's difficult, that they put that in a basket, and then after your work hour, you then go back like you would have done had you been, off site out of home when they were doing it originally, to do that for homework hours. So it could still be similar and kind of simulate a actual school day, because it's going to happen if you're working the full 8 hours, right?
Okay. Next question is, I know this is a difficult time for those in domestic violence situations.
Yes.
Any words of advice on how we may help?
Yes, so absolutely share the resources that we have. We have the Domestic Violence Action Center. We have, national hotlines. Please share those online. It is a very challenging time. When the people say like shelter at home, not every home is safe. And we need to make sure that they know that there's still resources available. They can absolutely call the crisis line. If you know someone who is not safe at home and being harmed, you can let people know. You can call that in so people can get the help that they need, but there are resources available for places that they could go to stay for pulling them out of those situations. Because yes, absolutely, we are seeing a rise in domestic violence cases, and we need to make sure that everyone knows resources are available for them and we are able to take them in and help them.
And a follow-up to that question is, how could we as providers work with local public figures to bring awareness and educate individuals that might be experiencing the dangers of intimate partner violence during this current stay-at-home order? Example, displaying service contact information during press conferences, offering support information through media, etc.
I think it's a little bit more challenging. So normally we have meetings and task forces and those things that happen at the legislature that keeps everyone updated. But that's kind of harder because we're not having those opportunities anymore. I would say absolutely call your those direct offices. Some of them are very active. Some of our political leaders are actually very active on social media, so you can message them and they are literally like reading it, responding, and you can send messages to them directly to let them know, please have that as part of what you're sharing. For those who aren't as active on social media, call the offices, let them know that's something that you absolutely want to see. But I think the vast majority of people who are using social media and quite intensely right now, so you can share those on their social media pages as well, and they will have that there. So we just have to keep reaching out and letting them know that people aren't safe even when they're sheltering at home and that they're sharing that information. I've just now been hearing people talking about the domestic violence issue and really starting to put those numbers out there. So we're in the beginning, unfortunately. We just need to keep sharing.
Thank you. And this is going to be our last question regarding youth. So, do you have any suggestions or activities for engaging adolescents during this time via telehealth?
Oh, adolescents via telehealth. So, this adolescence, I think, is such an amazing time of, it was actually like one of my favorite groups to work with because they're able to process more deeply. They're able to kind of have that emotional conversation. I haven't seen any really explicit activities with youth, but some of the activities that I've used before with youth are, I find that they would still be helpful in terms of creating self-care lists for themselves. So, what are your favorite movies? What are your favorite music artists? What are your favorite things to do when you feel sad, when you feel anxious? And then have them map out for themselves kind of their own coping skills map, and then have them practice different ones. So you can say, like, this week we're going to try to practice, for example, deep breathing. And so if you like that, we're going to put that over here in this category. Just helping them create something that's very visual, very concrete, that's they can refer back to in case they need it. You can look for other resources so that they can use things that even some that Keiki use. So the calming jars, I have so many adults who use calming jars. They've pretty much been taken to different offices within my company because people just really like them. So there are some resources that have possibly been put out there as being useful for Keiki, but are actually really great, useful, and useful for adolescents. The other thing I think that is really underutilized for adolescents is the power of words. And so it could either be like spoken poetry, written prose, journaling prompts. I think that those have moved me and been so amazing to see how much our youth are able to put all their feelings and experiences into those kinds of art forms.
Okay. Thank you so much for answering all those questions. Running out of time, so to honor everyone's time, we are going to close. I want to give a special thanks to Dr. Mestisa Gass for taking the time out of your busy schedule to share your insights with us today. Thank you to all of you on Zoom for joining us, and especially thank you to all the HIPHI staff behind the scenes helping run this webinar. Please mark your calendars for next week's webinar. It is going to be on Wednesday again, April 15th, same time, 12:30 to 1:30. We are very excited to announce that we will be joined by U.S. Senator Brian Schatz, as well as Kathleen Algar. I am sorry if I said your name wrong, from Hawaii Children's Action Network to discuss economic relief through the CARES Act. Everyone take care, and we hope to see you next week. Thank you.